Thanks for joining the live stream. Sorry about the stream URL mix-up. It looks like at least a few of you made it over to the new stream. Yeah, sorry about that. I used Restream to send to the stream to multiple locations at once, and I accidentally pressed something that stopped the stream. And when you do that on Restream, you cannot restart it. It's just done forever. So yeah, so I had to create a new event and that changed all the URLs. So, but it looks like at least a few of you made it over. So thank you. Sorry for the delay in getting started. All right. So I'll do my normal intro here. For those of you who may not have seen the stream before or are watching on the recording, I'm Wayne Aker. I'm a Drupal developer, and I am the trainer at DrupalTutor.com, where I teach trainings for beginners, intermediate, advanced students, as well as private trainings. Like if you have a your company developers, if you have an agency and you want to train your developers, I can do that as well. Yeah, so on this live stream, I am building the new version of DrupalTutor.com, which is a site that has both e-commerce elements as well as learning management system elements, a lot of custom code, a lot of custom entities, etc. And so we're going through this and building it on the live stream. You can find out what we're going to work on every week by going to DrupalTutor.com/live. This is, if you sign up for email updates there, you'll get the email updates with the stream links every week, as well as the topics that we will be covering. Okay, so yeah, so where we left off last week, we finished up videos, and we got videos. Oh, and I should say also, if there are any questions, those of you who are here live, the comment feature on YouTube works. So you can type comments in and I can see them and I'll respond to them here on the stream. All right. So last week we finished videos and we got those migrated into media content on the site. And so this week we're going to go the next step here and we're going to do webinar content. So a webinar on the site is one of the ways that students can actually see a video. So students cannot go to the video page, at least on the current site. They can see a video if it's a course video, they would go to a lesson page and see that. Or if it's a recording of a Zoom meeting for the live sessions that we have at DrupalTutor.com, then they would go to a webinar page, and that's where they would see it. So the webinar is sort of a wrapper around the video, and it contains the video itself, but also metadata like when is the webinar, because it's used before the video even happens. So when is the webinar? What is the link for the webinar? All that stuff. So yeah, so let's get started with that. Okay. All right. So we'll be working on the Drupal Tutor dev stack as usual, although I will be writing the code in PHP Storm because it's better. And so the first thing we will, better than the code editor that's built in here. So the first thing we're going to do is we will migrate get the migration set up for webinar content. Now, webinars on the current site are a custom entity. And I think they are just called webinar. Let me look at the other code. This was a case where I created a custom entity, probably not necessary. I was a little excited about making custom entities when I made the Drupal Tutor website. So this is an area where I want to simplify it down. We're just going to use a content type. And we actually, we've already created the content type for this. We think we did it in maybe the first live stream. And so, yeah, we have a webinar content type. And let's see, how are we going to link? Yeah, we have field content, which is a dynamic entity reference. That's how we're going to link to the videos. And then we have this other information about the webinar types and everything. So let's start with migration. We've done several of these so far. So I'll create a new migration file. I'll call it DT content node webinar, if I can type. And let's just start by copying in, because we already did the blog node. So let's just start with that because it's got some of the basic stuff in there. So we'll change the ID. And this is for webinars. And the content type is webinar. Title changed. UID, we can just set those all to 1 because they're all created by me. The path. Okay, now we don't have any paragraphs, so let's get rid of that. And this is going to create. Oh, actually, this is a mistake up here. These are not nodes. These are webinar entity type. And I don't think they have bundles. So actually, yeah, they don't have bundles. So I think we can actually just get rid of that. But it's going to go to node entities. Sorry, yeah, node entities of webinar type. All right, so that's the basic stuff. Let's add in some of the fields, which we had them listed in the TSD. I think some of these actually are the same. So like start date. Oh, okay. So some of these have moved as far as their naming, because when you create a custom entity, and we will create a custom entity later, you can define your base fields, and they don't have to start, at least the machine name doesn't have to start with like field underscore, which is different than if you're adding them through the interface where they all have to start with field underscore. So some of the ones that were base entities, the machine names are a little different. So like we have field start date instead of start date. So we need to pay close attention to that. But I think all the field types should be the same. So for the most part, we can just copy most of these over. So field start date will come from start date. Duration, field duration. Field URL from webinar URL. Okay, webinar type is a list text. Now I need to pull up actually to see. Let me see what the possible types are. On the current site. I can't remember if I have that coded in here. Okay, so currently there are two. There's meeting and webinar. Now, I think the reason why that is originally I was using Zoom Webinar for some of them, but then I just decided to use, there's not that many people in them, that's not that useful to use the webinar features. So I switched to Zoom Meeting. Those two things have two different APIs. So I think that's why I was keeping them straight. I do still want to have this field, but I don't really care about Zoom Meeting versus Zoom Webinar. So I think what are my fields here? This is webinar type. And I think I changed it here. So yeah, I just have one called Zoom. And actually at some point, probably I should do these live streams as sort of webinar content as well. I mean, they're similar to a webinar, but so I'm going to put a second one here, like live stream. It doesn't really matter. None of the content that we have is going to, none of the webinar content we have is going to be a live stream, but you know, the idea that a webinar can be delivered by different technologies, that should be in here somewhere, because we only want the Zoom integration to work on the Zoom things. So we have to make sure that it can exclude that. All right, so coming back over here, what is our field? Our field is field webinar type. Now, we cannot copy this over directly because it's either going to be meeting or webinar in the other system, and those aren't valid values in the new system. But we know how to map one value to the other. So there is a plugin called static map that we can use here. So we can do static map, source is webinar type. And then we have to give it a map. And so meeting will go to Zoom. They're all going to go to Zoom basically. And webinar will also go to Zoom. Yeah. So I think that's actually all we need. That should map any of those values over to Zoom. I will say just, we don't need this here, but just for completeness, if you're trying to use a static map and you only want to override like some of the fields, like let's say there were 10 possible options, 2 of them have changed, and you want to map just those 2, you can add bypass true here. And if there is a value that doesn't match one of these 2 that I had listed here, then it would just pass that original value. I mean, we can leave this in here. None of them, this should account for all of the values, but if there were another value, it could just copy it in there. All right. So, I mean, I guess I don't really need a static map. I could just use default value, right? Because they're all Zoom, but actually, I'm not sure if that's true if they're all Zoom. Some of the original ones weren't Zoom at all. Like they were GoToMeeting, but I don't even know what's stored for them. So maybe we should leave bypass true because some of them may be empty or something. All right. Okay, so then we have meeting type, which is a taxonomy. So let's... the plugin will be migration lookup. We haven't done this migration though yet, so we're going to have to do it. And so meeting type is what is used to differentiate different sort of series of webinars. So most of them are all the same weekly live stream, but sometimes there are private ones. And let's see. Oh, this actually isn't what I wanted. I didn't really want to do this from CSV. So what I really want the same kind of thing that we have here. Only the entity type is taxonomy term and the bundle is sorry, let me pull it up on the old site in another window here. The bundle is meeting type. All right, none of them have parents, so just name and weight should be enough. And so this should be enough to just pull those taxonomy terms over. Yeah, this should be good. Let me make sure that we have that taxonomy type over here. Yes, we do. So let's clear caches, and let's go ahead and do this import real quick. There should only be like 2 of them, 2 or 3, I think. Let's see. Oh, sorry. This message is about, again, this error message pops up all the time. This is about something else. I don't know what module. It's like the migrate Drupal module installed something and it's trying to do something else. I don't know. It's annoying though, because actually it worked. It brought over 2 items. Because like I said, I think there's only a couple there. Let's just double check. Yeah, those are the only 2 that are live on the site. So that came over fine. All right, so that's done. So now we can finish this up. This is migration lookup. Migration is that one. And source is meeting type. All right, next field. Course session, I'm going to leave that. Let's see. I'm going to leave that out. We can't really do that one right now because we don't have course sessions. And I haven't brought over the course sessions yet because I'm still not 100% sure if I want to make those custom or if I want to use the group module. I got another project I'm working on for a client that's going to be a heavy use of the group module. And I kind of want to get into that project because I haven't used group module in large degree to a heavy degree yet. And so I want to get into that project a little further, see how group module is. And if it seems like it's going to work without too much trouble, then I might use the group module. So I've been holding off on creating those custom types. So we'll hold off on, we can't create this field really. And then we have the field content, and I created a dynamic entity reference because we may eventually have other kinds of content other than media. Now this is going to create a little bit of a difficulty because I don't know what you actually have to store for a dynamic entity reference. Like what are the keys of it? So let's go look at the database. I mean, we could look in the code as well for dynamic entity reference, but one thing we can do is if we go here to, so this is on node, it's field content. If I look here at the structure, okay, so it's field content target ID, field content target type. So there's it has 2 keys, target ID and target type. So we have field content. It's going to be that there's only going to be 1 on any existing piece of content because it only supported 1 before. So I think we can just hard code this to 0. Field content 0. Target ID is going to come from content ID, which was an entity reference in the other system. But it needs, so this will be plugin migration lookup. And the migration is the remote video migration because that originally linked to a video node. Now it's going to link to a media. So we already did that migration before. And then the source is content. Let me make sure. I think it's content ID. Yeah, it's content ID. And I don't know if I think I probably do. I'm going to go ahead and specify it like that because I think I really just need the first one's target ID into the target ID here. And then I'm also going to need field content 0 target type, which again, I sort of figured out by looking at this database column name here. But this can be hard-coded because we know that they're all medias. So this could be plugin, default value, media. And I think that should work. Okay. What other fields are there? Field notes. And there was a notes before that was also a long text. So I think that one will just go straight over. Field notes from notes. And I did have an is public flag, which if I end up using these for live streams will be important because then there will be some of them that are public. I haven't really had an occasion to use it. So probably it doesn't matter as far as copying this over, but we can go ahead. Those should map directly over. I'm not going to worry about meta tags or anything. We can do there is a status. They should all probably be published, but the created date. Oh, wait. Yeah, we did the date already. Okay. Yeah, we can copy. Do I have created date already up here? Yeah, created date's already covered. And then the only thing is field migration ID. On the webinar, the ID is, I think it's just ID. Let me confirm. Yeah, it's just ID. Okay, so Joseph points out to me that I've made a bug here that it's, thank you for watching carefully. Yeah, its field is public. Thank you. Let me make sure that that is actually what is on the site. Oh, hey, I don't even have it here. Well, we'll add it then. I must have missed it. Maybe because it was in the lower section. I must have missed it when we were adding these. Okay, so field is public, so let's make sure. Okay, so now that should match. Let's just, all these other ones look good. All right, so let's see if this works. Just clear caches for good measure. And then let's try with like just one of these. So I'm also going to debug it. So migrate debug limit 1. Now the problem is the webinar entity type does not exist. Okay, so maybe this is a problem with this. So it definitely exists. but maybe because this is a custom entity, it can't, this Drupal 8 entity plugin cannot see it. Like maybe it only works with regular Drupal entities. I mean, the webinars are in the database, but of course it doesn't have access to the configuration of the, of the other site. Like if we look in legacy, just make sure they're here, but they should be. There should be a webinar table. Yeah, see, there's a webinar table. It is here. All right, so we might have to skip doing the rest of the migration on these. That's okay. We can still go ahead and do the Zoom stuff that I wanted to do. I will find out if there's something special you have to do in order to use this with a custom entity. Clearly, it doesn't know about webinars, but I'll figure that out for next week. In the meantime, though, let's go ahead and do the Zoom stuff because that's really about new webinars anyway. So what we want, the Zoom integration, and I already have this on the current site. So it's similar to last week. We'll sort of be copying over some of the code and then reworking it for the new fields, but I'll talk it through as I do that. What I want is when I create a new webinar on the site, I want it to automatically, if it's assuming it's of type Zoom meeting, then I want it to automatically create a Zoom meeting for me, get the URL for that, put it on, save it into the webinar node. And yeah, and then anytime I edit it, like if I were to change the date or time, then I want it to change the date and time in Zoom. And anytime I delete it, I want it to delete it off Zoom. So that's what we're gonna accomplish. So let's, we can close up these migrations and let's create a new module, and I will call it DT webinar, just to keep it sort of consistent with the one I have on the current site, though I am gonna create it from scratch because we're not, that module has like the custom entity and everything else in it that we're no longer gonna need. So we'll create an info file and just give me some boilerplate here. This is DrupalTutor webinars. And dependencies are none really. I mean, media maybe, but I think we can leave out dependencies. All right, and then we're going to need a module file because we're going to need to hook into the saving of the webinar nodes. So we're going to need to use a hook for that. And the hook we can use is entity pre-save. All right, so we only want to have this happen when the entity is when the entity get entity type ID is a node and the entity bundle is webinar, because that's the only time that this applies. And then let me see, because I do have a service we're going to copy over. Let me see how I did this last time. Okay, so it looks like I actually did most of my logic in here, which maybe is not the best way to do it. But let's Let me pull this content over. Let me pull this stuff over, and then we'll rework it, because I think there's, as I'm just skimming through this code here, I can definitely see some improvements that could be made. Okay. All right, so we don't have any webinars. All right, so we eventually need to get down to this data array, which has the webinar type, which is probably that's actually no longer necessary, because we're only doing Zoom meetings, not webinars. The name, the start date, the duration, the time zone. So we need to get this data organized from whatever is in the webinar node. So let's do that. So let me just see. I have this date helper object. What am I doing with that? It doesn't look like, oh wait, get seconds from date interval. All right, well, we can probably do that without that. Let's just get rid of that. Okay, so the name actually, in this case, the name can come from the title, because that'll give more flexibility. So, so we can use the entity label. We don't need the webinar type. That isn't, oh, well, hold on. We do need to check the webinar type. We want to, there actually needs to be another check here, which is entity get, and the field was called field webinar type. If it's not empty, and if the value equals Zoom, looks like I got some mismatched parentheses here somewhere. Oh, maybe not. Why does it keep making more? Oh, because I haven't closed this one. All right. And then none of this should happen unless that's true, because we don't want it to do it unless it's a Zoom meeting. So then all of this should happen in here. All right. So we start out with the start date and a duration being null. We have the name. The URL starts out as null. Wait. The URL, what if we already have a URL? I must have some code for that down here already. Yeah, okay, so we can sort of combine this here. Okay, if it's not empty, then Something is definitely off with my parentheses. Why is this like, I've got like an unclosed something somewhere because it keeps making like too many parentheses or too many curly brackets. I don't know. It's kind of annoying. I'll figure it out at the end. All right. So if it's not empty, then the URL is equal to this. And I think it should be just URI is the property inside of field URL. So that takes care of URL. So let's delete this part. Webinar type we got rid of. Name, we've already got that taken care of. So start date. So we can do the same kind of type of thing here. This is field start date. Then start date is equal to, and I guess we can simplify these down. Can't we do, well, let's just leave them like this. Let's see. Field start date, and I think it's value for start date. We may have to look at, we're going to look at what this actually gives us because I can't, it may not be in the right formats. And then the same thing for duration. Okay, so that takes care of that. So at this point, we should have start date, name. I can pull this one out because it's a little different. Let's put it at the top. Now, I will say this is definitely not going to be a datetime object, so that's probably where we're going to have to do. This probably needs to be, oops, it's a mistake. Something like new datetime with the value. All right. So let's, all right, I'm going to pull this other code out for right now. And let's just see if we can, just going to paste it over here somewhere. And then let's clean up this parentheses problems or these brackets problems. And I just want to dump out, oh, I want that data. Let's see what we actually have here. So I'm just going to dump out these fields to make sure that we're actually getting the right data here. And let's enable this module. Okay, so now if I go create a webinar, and we'll leave all this other stuff blank for right now. And save. Okay, so we have a start date. It's a date time. That is the wrong time. Didn't I put in, what time did I actually put in there? Yeah, I said 1 p.m. I don't know why I have 18 but it's still the time zone America, Detroit. That's weird. I think I might know what the issue is there, but well, let's look at that. Okay, duration did not come through. The URL did not come through. So we got to fix those as well. All right, the first thing let's do is let's dump out what do I actually have right here? So this is a pre-save, so we can just keep resaving it to see what we got. So, all right. The thing is, that's weird. That's not even, do I have the wrong time zone set up? Because like that's not even just UTC from East Coast time zone. No, not this one. Regional settings. Okay, so I have this time zone set up. So how come when I say 1 p.m. Oh, that's 5 hours later. But aren't we're only 4 hours. Well, okay. It does appear to be like it's not entirely sure. That doesn't seem right because I think it should only be 4 hours different right now, isn't it? But anyway, it is adjusting by the time zone, so that part's okay. But it hasn't. It's adjusted by the time zone, but I need to fix this datetime object because this datetime object is in my current time zone, which is wrong. I think that you can pass a second parameter here. That's the time zone. This needs to be a new date time zone. And it's built into Drupal. There's a constant date time item interface date storage time zone, which it's UTC. You could just type it out, but theoretically, maybe the storage time zone would change at some point. I don't know why, but so that makes sure that you're using the correct time zone. Yes, Joseph says EST is -5 and EDT is -4, and that is correct. However, we're still in EST. That's right. For some reason, I was thinking we were in EDT. Yeah, okay, so this is right. This is right. Yeah. Okay, so stupid on my part. So it's right. Okay, so after changing the time zone, yes, now it's correct because 18 hour in UTC is the correct time. All right, so the name is right, the start date is right as a datetime object. So now I just need to fix duration and URL. Yeah. Joseph says datetime is every programmer's nightmare. It's true. Which is why I usually try to just stick with the datetime objects in PHP because they can do a lot of the math and things for you. All right, so we got the time worked out. Let's look at what's going on with duration. Oh, you know what? I don't think it's value. Let's get value. I think that interval field has two sub properties, interval and period. And that's where I had some code. Let me pull up this code I had before. That was where I was using the date time helper. It was get the number of seconds from the interval. So let me actually see what that function was. It was in another module that I don't have on the site right now, but let me just see if we can copy that one algorithm in here. Yeah, so let's just copy this in and let's give it a, say, DT webinar. Seconds from interval. And the reason I need seconds is because I think that is what the Zoom software or Zoom API expects. Everything needs to be specified in seconds. All right, now the other thing is this is from a date interval. So I need to have a date interval object. What is a date? I need to look again at my other code here because I don't remember how. Okay, it looks like we can get one from the field, I think. So let's try it this way. If we get the first one and then get value, according to my previous code, this should give us a date interval object. That did not. That just got me. Okay, hold on. I must have missed something over here. Oh, there was another thing in the date helper. Get date interval from interval properties. So again, I'm just going to bring this in here. All right, so this creates a date. This will create the correct thing. So basically, it looks like we can create a date interval using create from date string with the interval, which is the number, followed by the period, which is seconds, hours, whatever it is. That will create a date interval object. Then with the date interval object, this allows us to get the number of seconds. Can't believe there's not an easier way to do that. Yeah, I guess there isn't. So the way we do that is just to create two dates with that date interval between them and then subtract the timestamps. That gives us the number of seconds. All right, so now let's go back up here, duration. So we'll switch this array to, we'll switch this array to a date interval object. Let's just see if that works. All right, now we have a date interval object of 1 hour. And okay, so now we're just down to the URL, which also doesn't work. Oh, well then actually the URL works because we don't have one yet. So that part is fine. All right, so going back to the code. I have this data array that I'm creating, and this is where we need the seconds. All right, so this is the data that needs to be sent to the Zoom API. Topic is what they call the title of your meeting name, the start date, the duration in seconds, and the time zone. There are some other keys you need for authentication, but I'll show those in a moment. So then we have some logic here. So if the webinar, if we already had a URL, then we need to update the webinar. If we don't have one, then we need to create it using this data. So I need, I have a webinar API service, which is something I had defined in the previous module, and I'll just recreate here. So I'll need a source service and let's see, it's called Zoom Webinar API. All right, and there's an interface as well, because theoretically there could be other services that we would use at some point. And so I also created an interface, webinar API interface. Okay, so the interface defines the create webinar, update webinar, delete webinar, and get webinar. It doesn't need this webinar type anymore, I don't think. I mean, theoretically, something else might support subtypes, but not ours. Okay, so yeah, so I have a lot of the hard work is done by another PHP library that I created, and I need to look up what that one's called. It's Ingenuity Zoom SDK. So I can just composer require this package still exists. Yeah, it's here in GitHub. Oh, maybe I need to add the repository, because I don't think it's not in Packagist. So I have to, I have to add the repository for it to my composer file. Yeah, so right here, because it's in this specific GitHub repository, I can add that. Now, if I call this, it should find it. Yeah. Now this, I will say this does not, if you're thinking like, oh great, I'm just going to use Wayne's library, it's extremely limited. It only does like create, update, delete of these few things. It doesn't have fully featured everything the Zoom API can do. I only built it as far as I needed it. So I don't necessarily recommend it for others, but it does work. Okay, so now I think we should have that. Probably it's not going to find it. Well, that's okay if it doesn't autocomplete. PHP Storm can't see that we have it because it's on the server. I mean, I might be able to. I could start downloading, but this could take a while. Okay, so let's look at how this works. So we have the Zoom API. This is the service from the PHP library. And then I have a config object. This is a Drupal config where we will store the API key and some other information we need. So the config will be DT webinar Zoom API. And then Zoom API is the object that we're going to create, again, from that PHP library. And it requires a key and a secret. And there's one other thing we need, which is the host email address. So in my settings.local.php, I've created some samples here. So because I'm not going to create a configuration form for it. So I'll just set them here. There's a key, there's a secret, and there's a host email address. And then I've overridden them with the real ones in settings.credential, which I'm not going to show on the live stream, but they're there with real ones. And yeah, this is taking forever. Let's not do that. Let's just cancel that. All right. So we want to create webinar first. So let's focus on that one. We don't care about the type anymore because we're not going to get here unless it's a Zoom, and we don't care about whether it's we're not doing webinar anymore. So where do I actually use this type? Okay, I use it here. So let's just hard code it in here. The type's always going to be meeting. All right. So the host, this gets the email address. Oh yeah. Okay. So you have to look it up. That's right. You have to look up. You need the host like Zoom numerical ID. So I have the email address in there, and then this API get user by email gives you the host user ID. Yeah, it looks like I hard coded my email address in there. But it is actually looking for what's in the config right here. So that's fine. So it'll look that up. It will get the host ID. Then it will create a new meeting. And then we need to set the time zone, the start date, and the duration, which we already created in that data object. And a few settings. And then create the meeting, and then it returns the join URL. All right, so we need to finish defining the service. So we're going to need a DT webinar.services.yaml. And I can probably save some time by copying this over. Okay, so here is the service definition. All right, so now back over here, we have that webinar API object, and we can now call create webinar and get the URL. And then what we would want to do, and let me just look back at the code that I had before, but I would think we would want to save that right onto the node. But let me just see if we did anything else before. Yeah, so the code we had before was after creating the webinar, we would set the URL. So I think that is, except it's not this anymore, it's just field URL. And the other thing that I would do, actually we don't need the, actually we may need this. I had another thing called status, which we may need at some point. All right, I may need to bring that back at some point, but we'll leave it out for now. Basically, I need a way to tell, has the webinar already occurred? Is it active or is it completed webinar? And I don't actually think I created that field, so I'll have to go back and do that, but I'm not going to do that now. Let's just see if we can get this working. So we'll set the field URL. Theoretically, this will work. Let's just dump that URL out as well. So there's no URL now. If I save this, it should create a Zoom meeting. Nope. Oh, I need to clear cache because I created a new service. Okay, so we'll edit this again. Hey, and there's a Zoom meeting. So it worked. So we got a Zoom meeting for tomorrow. Let's see. I should double check that it actually created it at the correct time. And that it's under my account, should be, but I'll just load up Zoom and look at my scheduled meetings. Yeah, so I can bring it in here and show you. There's one tomorrow. Oh, except the duration, something's wrong with the duration. So there's a meeting tomorrow. Testing was what we called this node, so that makes sense, but it's 1 p.m. to 1 a.m. So what exactly did it do? Whoa, it's like a lot of days. So something's wrong with that calculation for the number of seconds. So let's dump that out. Before we do that, let's go ahead and go through the update webinar and make sure that it's going to work, because then we can just keep running this and see if it fixes it. So if we have update webinar, get default host is correct, which over here, this is just getting the ID number for the meeting out of the URL, because this assumes the URL already exists. So that's fine. I think that should work like before. We don't care about the webinar type. It's always going to be meeting, so I'll just get rid of that. So in this case, we get the meeting from the ID. Then we update the meeting with stuff from this data. Let's see what that does. That copies the topic, the start time, and the duration. All right, so we do that, and we have this new meeting object. Then we call that API, which is, in this case, the API is the PHP library that I wrote to update the meeting, and then return the join URL again. So, okay, so that looks fine. That should work if the create worked. So let's dump out the data array. So it should, because something's wrong with that calculation for seconds, though we can test other things like testing 2. Theoretically, it should rename it. So here's the data object. The duration is 3600. So that's totally what it's supposed to be. Okay, that's weird. Okay, so we can see it actually updated. I still don't know why I mean, I don't even know how you get to 30 from 3600 to like multi-day, because this is going like 3 days. Let's so this is okay, so the data is correct. So something is happening lower in here. Let's I need to get the I need to look at the code that's inside of my library to see exactly what it's doing when it sends to Zoom, because something doesn't seem right. So when we're in here and we're just setting the duration on this meeting object, which is fine. It's just a number of seconds. It's the correct number of seconds. So then why? Just going to make sure there's no other math happening here. Inside of this? Doesn't appear so. Let me log into my Zoom and see if it says the same thing if I look at it on the web, because this code works, I think, for the existing, like, yeah, it has the wrong thing over there too. But all the ones that I've scheduled, even ones I scheduled from the regular site, are fine. That's suspicious. From the real site. So let's just take a look. Let's dump it. Yeah, I'm going to edit inside of my library just to dump out this data to see if somehow it's getting changed. I don't know why, but um yeah. Well, I might have to troubleshoot that later. Not really sure why those times are coming out so weird. Because we're definitely looks like we're passing the correct thing. All right. So okay, so let's other than the duration, let's try to do another update. Like, can we move the time? Like if it's not 1, let's say it moves to 3. on a different day. And then, okay, so now it says the 4th. So it is moving it, with the same problem with the duration for whatever reason. So the update is working. So the last thing that I want to do is delete should work. So let's clean up some of this dumping that I have in here. And the only other thing is, if we delete a webinar, I want to delete the corresponding Zoom meeting if there is one. So we can use hook entity delete to hook into that. And again, we'll only want to run this if all of these things are true. If it's a Zoom meeting, it's a webinar, it's a node, it's a webinar, it's of webinar type Zoom. And actually it has to have a URL as well. So actually I think this we need to get the URL. Okay, so if we have the URL, then I don't want to update. If it has a URL, we want to delete. Let me just see if there's anything else I did here. I basically just did the same thing. And then we have delete webinar. So I need that webinar API object, that service, which here's the code I used to grab that before. So I have the webinar API object. I call delete webinar. I have to create a data. Wait, why do I need a data array? I don't think actually that's needed anymore. Let's see what that does exactly. I think that's only, yeah, it's only looking at the webinar type. All I need is the ID. So we don't need this anymore. I need to fix the interface so that this works. So now it's going to get the host, and all I need is the host ID and the webinar ID, which is the same code from the Zoom meeting. So now I don't need that. Yep. When I can get that URL, I can get the ID from the URL. Yeah, that should work. So let's go. First, we got to clear caches because we added a new hook. And let's delete. And we'll see here. Okay, so I do have the Zoom meeting is there. So after I delete this, okay, let me look back at what did I do before. Somehow I think I'm missing a piece here. Okay, my thing expects Argument 1 must be a meeting. Okay, that's weird because it doesn't on the other one. Of course, maybe it doesn't work. Maybe it doesn't work because I don't delete them very often. It definitely expects it to be a meeting. Okay. Although it seems like the only thing it uses it for, well, I'm not going to change my thing. So I think I have a this API get meeting, which takes an ID. So assuming I can get a meeting, then delete the meeting. Okay, so this probably got deleted. Yeah. So we're gonna have to create another one. Okay, so we create one. And we see that it's got a Zoom URL. If I look over here, here's test 3 right here. And now if I delete it, oh, I didn't update this. Okay, so we got to do that again. All right. So again, let's make sure that it's on Zoom. There's test 4. And now we delete. And yeah, test 4 disappeared. So now it's syncing with the Zoom API. All right. So between this week and next week, I will figure out why the duration wasn't working. And I will also figure out what we have to do migrations. And then at the beginning of next week, we'll solve both of those problems, or I will show you the solutions to them if I have to work them out behind the scenes. But I'll walk through that. And then I want to do the last part, which is to create, I usually like to create all my Zoom meetings, like all my webinars, like 6 months in advance. So I will I'll create a bulk creation form where you can create like 6 months worth of Zoom meetings all at once on one page. So yeah, so that's what we'll do next week. And as well as probably a little bit more than that, but I'll figure out what our next step will be, and I'll email it out to the email list, which of course, if you're not subscribed to the email list, you can do it by signing up at DrupalTutor.com/live. And yeah, so with that, I think we'll end for this week. Sorry again for the delay and the mix up on the stream URL, but thanks for sticking with it and showing up at the new URL. And we'll have another stream next week. Thanks.